And with that, we're going to dive into the BEAD webinar and start our recording. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining the Texas Broadband Development Office for the Industry Roundtable and the 9th webinar detailing the subgrantee selection process for the Texas Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. I'm Erin Bennell, Senior Broadband Program Coordinator here at the BDO, and throughout the presentation, I will be joined by John Wilkins, a member of our team helping to implement the program. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please submit them in the chat. If you are unable to use the chat, please email your questions to broadband@cpa.texas.gov. One of our team members will be monitoring the inbox and will add questions to the chat throughout the presentation. We will be sure to answer all submitted questions at the end of this presentation. Starting now, the webinar will be recorded and posted for future use. We understand that there will be many questions throughout the presentation, and it may be easier to ask them verbally. Just a reminder that if you choose to ask your question and come off camera, we will not be able to edit you out of the recording, and we will be requesting that you state your name and which organization you are representing. Today, we will cover some of the details around the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, or BEAD program. As you likely know, there have been updates from NTIA that impact the initial process for implementing the Texas BEAD program. Today, we will be reviewing NTIA's Restructuring BEAD Policy Notice and what the BEAD program will look like in Texas. And our team is providing a link to the policy notice in the chat for all of you to follow along. First, we will recap the recent updates to the BEAD program from NTIA. On June 6, NTIA published a policy notice announcing changes to the BEAD program and timeline. The BDO has since modified its subgrantee selection process, including key updates around eliminating regulatory burdens, technology neutrality, and location true-up. The policy notice gave states until September 4th to complete the benefit of the bargain round and submit the final proposal for NTIA approval. The BDO has since submitted an extension waiver request on June 13th and has not heard anything from NTIA to date on the status of the request. As we learn more information about our waiver, we will be sure to keep you all updated. The guidance covered each of the listed topics. We will cover these details and how they might impact the Texas BEAD program. However, many aspects of the BDO's process will remain similar to what was previously communicated in previous webinars, roundtables, and guidance materials. And now we will cover the details of changes for the Texas BEAD program. One requirement of the new guidance is to update eligible locations. The locations must be updated to version 6 of the FCC fabric. The eligible locations currently on the Texas BEAD map and previously available to download is version 5 of the fabric, so there will be minor changes. The BDO anticipates posting a list of the locations that will be removed from version 5 to version 6 fabric on the application portal homepage for reference. The BDO will not be posting a full list with only the eligible locations for BEAD on this landing page. NTIA did provide states with a list of locations impacted by state and federal programs. Texas had no changes in the enforceable commitments from the BEAD challenge process to now. While the locations may change, the project area units will not change, just the specific list of eligible locations. The full list of eligible locations, incorporating all updates, will be available within the application portal along with Form 3. So once you are ready to start putting together your official application for funding, those locations will be updated in the portal, and the process will be exactly the same as we have described in the past. One major change from the policy notice is the change in the definition of priority broadband projects. The guidance defines priority broadband project according to the IIJA statutory definition, which means a project that provides broadband service at speeds of no less than 100 megabits per second for downloads and 20 megabits per second for uploads, has a latency less than or equal to 100 milliseconds, and can easily scale speeds over time to meet the evolving connectivity needs of households and businesses, and support the deployment of 5G, successor wireless technologies, and other advanced services. Note that originally the BDO was planning to sort applications into candidate pools based on technology type and percentage of unserved locations. Now, applications will be considered based on priority versus non-priority per the statutory definition. In the application, applicants will certify that the proposed project or projects meet the priority requirements. In addition to technical questions throughout the application, applicants must submit certification from a professional engineer confirming the project's technical capabilities and feasibility. The BDO reserves the right to follow up with applicants directly to gain clarity on their projects. The evaluation and scoring criteria has also been updated per the NTIA policy notice. To ensure the best overall cost for the state, the BDO will only be using primary and secondary scoring, with the primary scoring criteria serving as the main factor for determining an awarded project. The primary criteria is minimal BEAD program outlay to support obtaining the best overall cost for the state. However, the calculation of minimal BEAD program outlay per location has changed slightly from previous guidance. Served locations included in the project area are no longer included in the equation to determine the minimal BEAD program outlay. And I am going to pause and invite John to come on and say anything that he might want to add to this section.
Sure, thanks, Erin. Is my audio okay? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Really just two things to emphasize. I think we're going to assume that everyone on this webinar is generally familiar with the June 6th NTI guidance. And as therefore everyone should be aware, that new guidance places overwhelming emphasis on the minimal BEAD outlay criteria. So of course that's not new. The prior approach included that as a primary criteria. Now it is the primary criteria. So just two things to really emphasize. First one, just to be clear, the metric is the BEAD outlay, meaning the grant request. Therefore, even though match itself is not a scored criteria directly, I mean, implicitly it is. In other words, whatever your cost is for a project, the way that you score most points will be by maximizing your own match and therefore minimizing the BEAD outlay, the grant request amount. That's the primary criteria. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, the TMAP Texas Match program is still available, and therefore we really encourage applicants to try to maximize that, to maximize your own collective match and therefore minimize your BEAD outlay. Other thing, just to emphasize the one change, the new NTI notice puts all states on a very strict timeline. As Erin mentioned, Texas is perhaps trying to get a little bit of an extension for that, but we are definitely on a much faster timeline, we in all states. Therefore, this is not going to be quite as measured of a process with multiple rounds. It's imperative that you put your absolute lowest grant request in your primary application. That's what we're going to go with, and the train will be moving quickly. Okay, back to you, Erin.
Thanks, John. While the cost of the project will be the main factor for determining an awarded project, if two project applications have the same general project area and are within 15% of costs, the primary criteria, then the applications will be considered according to the secondary criteria. Secondary criteria is made up of three components. One, speed of network and other technical capabilities, with higher scores given to applicants based on speed, latency, and other technical capabilities. This component has a max score of 95 points. Two, speed to deployment. All awardees must provide service within 4 years, though faster deployment may receive more points. This has a max of 5 points. And three, if the project was previously awarded because Texas had not made any preliminary awards, this is not applicable. So how does this new scoring work? In this example, 3 priority applications for the same general project area received the scores provided on the right side of the screen. Project 1 submitted an application for $100 per location. Since it submitted the lowest cost, the BDO will first consider Project 1. Project 2 submitted an application for $110 per location. This proposal is within 15% of the lowest cost, so the BDO will evaluate each project based on the secondary criteria. Project 3 may have a higher secondary score than Project 1, but it is not within 15% of the lowest option, so it will not be considered. The BDO will then determine if Project 1 or Project 2 will be awarded for the project area. As previously communicated, applicants will continue to apply for project areas made up of contiguous project area units, or PAUs. For the purpose of the BEAD program, contiguous means the PAUs are touching and/or have no non-selected eligible PAUs between them. Optionally, applicants may propose the removal of select broadband serviceable locations that the applicant determines are excessively high-cost locations from the project areas. Applicants will need to provide a justification for the removal of BSLs. The BDO does seek to maximize coverage of eligible locations while minimizing the cost to the program and encourages applicants to offer as much coverage as possible. The BDO reserves the right to determine if the proposed project area provides adequate coverage to a given PAU and is economically justified. Additionally, if an applicant removes locations from the project area, the applicant forfeits any assistance through the Texas Match Assistance Program. John, anything to add here?
Yes, thanks, Erin. I really just we should underscore what Erin said, which is even though under the new NTI mandatory guidance, applicants must be allowed to remove excessively high cost locations, the state's obligation to serve all locations is still there. In other words, BEAD is still a universal coverage program, but in the name of cost efficiency, a given application must be allowed to remove those that are really high cost that might drive the total cost up unreasonably. One thing that's worth pointing out is that the approach of still maximizing coverage is consistent with the NTI June 6th guidance. If you look at that closely, there's a discussion that says essentially it says that a state is permitted to pick a given application that may not be the absolute low cost for all locations if the total cost to serve all the locations is still lower. In other words, just put that in layman's terms, you're strongly encouraged not to take a given area and remove a large number of locations just to get an extremely low cost, because the state is allowed and will plan to still pick an application that collectively covers more locations in total. So use good judgment. I think we do understand that there are certainly going to be cases where a given small number of locations really changes a given project build that really drives the cost up. That's the intent behind this. The intent is not to cherry pick a given area to a maximal way and leave lots of locations stranded. Okay.
Thanks, John. After selecting the project area, applicants can submit a severability matrix. Originally, this was only available in the best and final offer or BAFO round. However, applicants now can submit in the benefit of the bargain round as there is no BAFO. For sub-projects, applicants will input project cost and applicant match. They cannot change the served locations included in the project area nor TMAP opt-in. Applicants must have fewer than 20% of served locations included in the sub-project area. So ensure any sub-project you might want to submit does not exceed the 20% threshold. Otherwise, it will not be considered. Applicants can also note that they would take any remaining locations if they cannot be awarded a project or sub-project. When noting the technology and other details for a given PAU, an applicant may indicate a willingness to serve any remaining locations within the PAU if the project area unit is awarded to another applicant and there are remaining locations. The sub-projects will be used during deconfliction. If the original project area cannot be awarded, all sub-projects may be considered. And here is an example of what the severability matrix will look like in the project application. The severability matrix will look exactly the same as described in the past. The only change is it must be filled out as part of the application since there is no longer a best and final offer round. Applicants will be able to input up to 10 sub-projects, selecting the PAUs included in each sub-project and the corresponding project cost and applicant match. John, anything to add?
Sure, thanks, Erin. So just to step back, and again, hopefully a lot of the folks on this webinar have been in the past ones. This is exactly the same approach to the severability matrix as we talked about before, but because of the new NTI much faster timeline, essentially the way we're going to have to run this is everything all at once. Okay, so you will get your application. Whereas before we were planning on a more methodical, sequential approach where you wouldn't submit this until you'd already been identified as having competition. Now, given the timeline, everything is just submitted in the main application. The other thing that's really worth pointing out, though, is especially given how quickly this is going to have to move, we really encourage all applicants to make sure you fully understand these different options that you have to express to the state the different kinds of projects that you would like to apply for. So we have the severability matrix, which, as we talked a lot about on past webinars, and we can point those out in the chat later on this if anyone isn't familiar. You essentially, with a given application, can, with the severability matrix, express basically sub projects within an application that you still might be willing to take if you can't have the whole one. You're also allowed to include the same PAU in more than one application. And essentially what those two together let you do is express many different contingent applications to us. And it's really important that you give us every last option that you'd be willing to take, because again, this process is going to be essentially run in one giant everything all at once. We're going to see what the lowest costs are for these different possible ways to cover the entire state. And therefore, you really have to make sure you figure out everything you might be willing to take in this main application round. It's no longer going to be a sequential process.
Thanks, John. The BDO plans to run the benefit of the bargain round or the application round, and then will seek to ensure universal coverage via the special process for still not covered locations. Applicants will indicate in their application if they are willing to take remaining BSLs, if in each PAU, if the full project area, proposed sub-project, or PAUs may not be awarded. The program updates required some modifications to the project-specific application Form 3. The modifications fall under the listed categories here. The BDO has done its best to update the Form 3 to remove all questions that are no longer required. However, if any of these topics are included in the form, they are optional and not included in scoring. A sample application Form 3 and templates for the application will be released with the notice of funding availability, so applicants can begin preparing prior to the launch of the application round. Specific revisions include revisions made to labor, employment, and workforce development, climate change requirements, open access or net neutrality, local coordination requirements, the middle class affordability requirement, and the low cost service option. And we encourage you to review the policy notice to understand exactly what those changes are. And finally, we will discuss what will happen in the coming weeks for the BDO subgrantee selection process. The BDO plans to release the Texas BEAD Notice of Funding Availability tomorrow, June 25th. Applicants will be able to submit official questions until 2 p.m. on Saturday, June 28th. When submitting questions, please indicate in the subject line that the question is for the BEAD program. Once the question period closes, the BDO will be working quickly to provide answers to all submitted questions and post the responses in time for the benefit of the bargain application period. The BDO anticipates the launch of the application round on Wednesday, July 9th. The BDO will accept applications through the BEAD portal until Wednesday, July 23rd at 2 p.m. This will be the only round of applications. For new applicants, the BDO is accepting Forms 1 and 2 with the opportunity to receive curing until the end of the day today. If you have not already registered for the Texas BEAD program, I strongly encourage you to submit your pre-registration information today to ensure all necessary information is provided. Finally, reminder that once the BEAD NOFA is released, the BDO is not able to provide programmatic support in any way. If you have any technical questions about the portal, please contact our help desk at txhelpdesk@ready.net. Additional resources may be found on the BDO website and the Texas BEAD application portal. The BDO is working to provide an application and resource guide, as well as a frequently asked questions document to provide clarity and support throughout the application period. We will now be accepting questions. As a reminder, we are recording the Q&A period. If you come off mute, please state your name and your organization before asking your question. If questions are submitted through the chat, we will not be sharing your name. All right. Omar, do you know who is
Thanks,
first?
Aaron. We have some questions queued up. Thank you guys for your patience. First up, Jim asks, is BEAD outlay reduced by any BIF matching?
By any BIF matching. So if you apply for BEAD funds, the Texas Match Assistance Program, which is backed by the Broadband Infrastructure Fund, that funding is not incorporated or scored or combined with BEAD funding. It's just the BEAD funding.
Thanks, Aaron. Next up, kind of a follow-up. Jim asks, on slide 16, how will the BDO decide between one or two?
That's going to be a comprehensive answer. We'll first be evaluating how many locations are being covered, and then whether or not it's technically feasible. So it is a little bit of a case-by-case situation.
Thanks, Aaron. Next question. Can you explain more about the Texas Match Assistance Program? How do you access that? Under what circumstances? And can you cover the 20% sub-project issue?
Yes, so the Texas Match Assistance Program is backed by our Broadband Infrastructure Fund, which was approved about 2 years ago. Someone correct me if I have that date wrong, which allows up to 12.5% of the project to be funded by state funds. It's intentionally designed to help reduce the cost of the match requirement, the 25% match requirement required by the BEAD program. So when you're filling out your application for your specific project area, there will be a section asking if you are opting into the Texas Match Assistance Program, and it'll automatically calculate what your new match requirement would be. As a reminder, though, if you do remove locations from your proposed project area, you will not be qualified for the Texas Match Assistance Program. The 20% sub-project issue, again, is the BDO will not be awarding projects that have where the locations are made up of more than 20% served locations. So we need mostly unserved and underserved locations in your project area. So if you do decide to participate in the severability matrix and break up your main project into smaller sub-projects, those sub-projects must also have no more than 20% served locations. And John, feel free to come back on and provide more context.
And as we talked about in some of the past webinars, that 20% served, I mean, all that issue is referencing is that in the federal statute that creates the BEAD program, the federal statute defines a BEAD fundable project as one that has no more than 20% served locations in it. So we're just parroting the statutory definition. But as Aaron talked about on this webinar, there's really no benefit to your grant application to include served locations. Really the reason that's there is just so that if in a given unserved area, underserved area, just given what the map looks like, you happen to be passing a location that might be served, technically it's okay to include it, but there's no real incentive to do it. This is really about the unserved and underserved locations. So focus on those. And essentially, if there are incidental served locations in a given area, it's not a big deal under the statute, but focus on the eligible locations.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Next up, a question. Are we still restricted to using the same PAUs only 3 times in different applications, or are we permitted greater flexibility now?
Yes, that restriction is still in place. So we still want you to be very strategic about which applications or which project areas you're applying for and which technologies you're applying with, and that combination altogether. But John, take it away.
Yeah, well, and just remember that was one of my points a few minutes ago. So yes, three applications per PAU, but each application can have a severability matrix, which up to 5 subprojects. So, if you do your scenario tree out of those 2, and also the ability to say that you maybe take locations that others exclude from a given area, you really have quite a few ways to cover a given PAU, and that's what we really encourage you to take advantage of, because putting 3 applications, each of which include a given PAU, each one of those can have severability matrices. You really can describe lots and lots and lots of ways that you might want to accept a given set of locations.
Thanks. And then kind of staying on that PAU topic, if PAUs must be contiguous, wouldn't subproject B include non-contiguous PAUs? Is that okay to have non-contiguous PAUs in subprojects?
Yes. So the reason why subproject B would be selected is because that middle project area unit, what we were calling project area unit 2, has been claimed by another applicant. And so you are breaking up your project and you're willing to take the remaining 2 project area units. So if your subprojects get broken up, it's fine.
Yeah, contiguity applies at the application level. At the sub-project level for a severability matrix, though, it's okay if it's not contiguous. That's the rule.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Next up, looks like a bit of a clarification. I think some may misunderstand the NTIA guidance and think that only the lowest minimal BEAD outlay matters. But isn't it true that if there are 2 applications for the same area, one is a PBP with a reasonable MBO, and the other project is an MPBP with a lower MBO, and the PBP be awarded rather than the BEAD award?
Yes, so just to clarify, PBP is Priority Broadband Project, MBO is Minimal BEAD Outlay, and NPBP is Non-Priority Broadband Project. So yes, in that case, we would be required to award the priority broadband project over the non-priority broadband project. We're putting a little bit more emphasis on the minimal BEAD program outlay because we do anticipate a lot more priority broadband projects than non-priority broadband projects. Of course, that might be us assuming a little bit, but that's what we're just trying to get everybody up and prepared for. John, anything to add with that one?
No, I mean, I'm assuming that most of the folks on this have read the notice. I mean, the priority always comes first is in the statute. The new guidance definitely says that's the rule. The difference is you can't just say that fiber is always priority. You have to actually make the showing, and as Aaron said, I think we do expect that lots of different technologies will claim that, and it'll be reviewed technically. But yes, to the extent in a given area, there's a priority project that might have a higher cost per passing than a non-priority, it would be selected as long as it wasn't excessively costly.
Thank you, guys. Next question, another clarifying question. Did I hear applicants will not be allowed to use the Texas Assistance Program if they remove BSLs from their project area?
That is correct. If in your project area selection phase, you remove locations from your project area, we will automatically calculate your Texas Match Assistance as 0. You will not be participating in the Texas Match Assistance Program.
Another question, has the NTIA explained to BDO why they are pushing such an extreme and unreasonably short timeline for the final proposal?
We have not received guidance in that form, and we are just conforming with the new policy guidance and the expectations set by NTIA to move forward as quickly as we possibly can.
Next question, what is the closing date?
The current closing date is set for July 23rd, so applicants will have 2 weeks to complete their applications. If we receive an update on any extensions provided by NTIA, we will be sure to update our applicants. Of course, the full schedule of events will be available in our notice of funding availability, available tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yeah, Aaron, it's worth pointing out in the timeline that the NTI guidance, as you'll see in it, I mean, it requires all states to have submitted their complete final proposal by September 4th. That's more than 3 days of work to prepare it, even after you've prepared your selections. There's a notice requirement. Even after the applications close on July 23rd, it'll take more than a few minutes to to run the selection process. So really that July 23rd is about as late as we can go, given the rest of the process to meet the NTI deadline of September 4th.
Thank you. The NTIA did not set a high cost threshold and left that to each state. Is that high cost threshold something that will be shared?
No, we have not set a high cost threshold ourselves. We are going to wait until we receive applications to see what a reasonable cost per location is for all of our regions across Texas.
Another question. I missed what the June 23rd date was for. I believe that must have been the July 23rd date. So thanks for answering that. Are counties that previously received RDOF through the FCC eligible to apply for BEAD funding?
The only counties that would be eligible for BEAD funding that have previously received RDOF is if those locations have since defaulted on RDOF. If we don't have a default associated with those locations, they are not eligible for BEAD.
Just one thing, members, it's RDOF. Neither RDOF nor BEAD operate at the county level, of course. I mean, it's about locations, and so RDOF, right, is a census block unit. And as Aaron said, if a given RDOF award had a default for a given census block, then those locations would be eligible for BEAD. But if not defaulted, they are not eligible.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Can you please detail the PE stamp requirement?
Yes, so along with your network diagram and your explanation of your project area, we do need a professional engineer to stamp off on that program and provide their signature that this is a feasible project that is able to be scaled per the requirements. More information will be available in our guidance documents that we're releasing very shortly. But John, anything you want to add about that one?
Well, just that a PE certification has always been a BEAD requirement. That's not new, but again, given the timeline, and also given the importance of the priority de novo review that has to be done, what Texas and frankly are going to see a lot of other states doing is essentially applying that PE requirement at this stage of the process, just so that we've got a little bit more. I'm going to call it engineering support for the technical claims that are going to be part of that priority determination. So, but as Aaron said, it's important that PE certification address essentially that scalability of the project, which is central to the priority definition.
Yeah. Staying on the topic of timelines, because of the short timelines, isn't this going to hurt the smaller providers who do not have the staff for the timeline you are showing?
We hope that our smaller providers still feel supported and encouraged enough to apply for the BEAD program. Unfortunately, this is the timeline that we are going to be working with. We'll be working as quickly and as fast as we possibly can to get our final proposal ready for NTIA approval per the notice. But we hope that you are all still encouraged and find some areas to consider applying for.
Yeah. Well, and Aaron, just remember, the timeline that we've been on was actually starting the application process on June 12th. So obviously things have changed a little bit, but July 9th is actually about 3 weeks later than really the timeline had been all spring. So, but again, the timeline is being driven at the federal level, and we're just dealing with that timeline on our side.
Thank you, guys. Do the CIAs or CAIs require more bandwidth than the standard 100/20?
Yes, so CAIs that do not currently receive 1 GB symmetrical are eligible for BEAD funding. And if you apply for a CAI, you are expected to provide 1 GB symmetrical service to those locations. And more information is available on that in our initial proposal volume 2 and many other BEAD resources provided by NTIA.
Awesome. Where will we be able to identify what areas are viewed as served or unserved/underserved for Texas?
So there's a few different options that you can go to. Our first option is available on our BEAD portal. We have a BEAD location map, so you can see different colored dots that show each individual location's level of service. We also have our project area unit map. So it's like a yellow highlighted census tract. That is our project area units. Those are eligible for BEAD funding, the locations within those census tracts. And then you can also download our BEAD eligible location list off of our registration page. We will be updating or providing another list that shows all of the locations being removed from BEAD eligibility just due to the differences between version 5 and version 6.
Next question, can you re-show the timelines, please?
I do not have an image of the timelines itself, but the timelines and the schedule of events will be available in our NOFA that's going to be released tomorrow.
Next up, how soon will we have the updated list of eligible locations?
As soon as possible. I believe we're trying to get that posted either end of the day today or tomorrow with the NOFA posting.
Next up, will there be an additional pole replacement fund available for BEAD?
There is no specific program using BEAD funding for the pole replacement program. Poles is an eligible cost with BEAD funds if your project requires aerial cable, fiber, or anything like that. That is an allowable cost, but we don't have anything specifically designed for pole replacement.
Next up, is BEAD outlay per location calculated based on only unserved locations, which would mean excluding any served locations from the denominator?
That is correct.
Next up, what technical test will the BDO use to determine which projects meet the 100/20 and the 100 millisecond latency requirements? Do LEO providers meet these requirements today?
So I'll let John actually answer this one. I think he's a little bit better about talking about the technicalities.
Well, I mean, the answer is we're going to review the technical submission. That's one of the things that the new NTI guidance is very clear on, is you cannot make categorical technology determinations, right? It's actually not permissible to say, LEO always is something, fiber is always something. That's what the new NTI guidance has rejected. Instead, it has to be based on evidence. And I guess here's the really important thing. Again, this is right out of the NTI guidance. It has to be specific to the project at a local level that is proposed. And so, I mean, just to use some of the examples that NTI has been providing to states, right? If you are proposing a given project in, Appalachia, and it's lots of trees and ridges and a river valley, and the locations are at the bottom of where the river is, that is a different technical showing than if you are out in the flatlands of Central Texas. And so the evidence needs to be reviewed at that local level. And the answer is we're going to see what is submitted, and we have staff at BDO and contractors that will look at it, and we'll just have to determine it project application by application. That's what the NTI guidance requires every state to do. By the way, just one thing that was said a second, just to really emphasize, the question about are served locations included in the calculation, so no, they are not. And just to be clear for everyone, that is a change. In the prior approach, they were going to be included, but just given the new NTI guidance and the kind of the specificity of that guidance, it is a change. And so the only denominator for BEAD outlay per location are the BEAD eligible locations, meaning the unserved and the underserved. That's the denominator for BEAD outlay per location.
Awesome. Thank you, John. How is fiber prioritization by Texas law being handled with the new guidance?
So we are not outright saying we are prioritizing fiber. We are prioritizing the technical capabilities that are best going to serve Texans. And if fiber meets those technical capabilities, they will be prioritized in the scoring criteria that goes with it.
Thanks, Aaron. Next up, wouldn't adding a covered location being passed benefit your application to meet pro forma feasibility? Would your application be penalized for adding covered location to make the project float?
Your application will not be penalized so long as you do not go over the 20% allowable served locations. If you stay at or below 20% served locations in your project or sub-project areas, there's no penalty, there's nothing against you. It's once you go over that we have to no longer consider your application.
That's right. And just again, that is a federal statutory requirement for the BEAD program. An eligible project for BEAD can have up to 20% served, not eligible locations. And as we've talked about, essentially that is there just to reflect the reality that sometimes the maps have a mix of eligible and ineligible. And to the question, I mean, to the extent the financial profile of a given project on a cost per passing basis or on a revenue basis includes some of those served locations, as long as they're below that 20% statutory maximum, it's fine to include. Certainly can be part of the financial profile, but your BEAD outlay score is not going to reflect that. Your BEAD outlay score is only going to be the eligible locations.
Awesome. Thanks, John. How long do LEO and unlicensed fixed wireless providers have to meet the speed and latency requirements?
All awardees will have 4 years to complete their construction of projects, and then all awardees will be held to the same reporting standards. So LEO, unlicensed fixed wireless, fiber, licensed fixed wireless, coax, everybody has to complete their build at the same exact time, and maintain those service levels for the federal interest period.
Will we see the updated eligible locations before we log into the portal?
So you'll see the eligible locations list as a download CSV, and we're also updating the public facing map so that you can kind of get a visual of it. Then once you log into the portal as an applicant and you start creating an application, the very first thing you have to do is select your project areas, and those will all be updated to reflect any changes with our eligible locations, which is not drastic in any way, shape, or form. It's, I think, 3,000 locations most.
Awesome. Is the BDO considering an overall maximum number of PAUs that can be awarded to a single applicant? For example, is it possible for one applicant to win 90% of all eligible statewide locations solely because they were the lowest bid? Concentration of risk.
We have not considered that. We want to award the best projects for the state of Texas. That being said, as an applicant, we want you to think honestly about what your bandwidth is as an organization and as a company. If you are not able to cover 47 project area units, please do not accept awards for 47 project area units. If you are able to do that, all the power to you. Continue with your applications.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, it's a good question. It's a reasonable question. It's just worth emphasizing really that the new NTI guidance really doesn't provide states much leeway. I mean, it's very concrete. The primary criteria is the BEAD outlay, as we talked about. Therefore, I think that in the first instance, if a given applicant gave the lowest BEAD outlay for some very large number of PAUs, under that guidance, right, the default would be yes, they should be selected. But, and this is what Aaron was just talking about, it's also very clear in the statute that states have the ability to review and decide the operational, technical, managerial, and financial qualifications of a given grantee. And so if in the scenario you gave, if someone really applied for 90%, so that's 200,000 plus locations for very, very large number of projects, it would really be essential that the demonstrated financial, operational, technical capability was up to that level. So that'd be the two sides of that coin.
Thanks, guys. Are reference prices still used in calculating minimum BEAD outlay?
No, it is no longer used to calculate. John, please correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like too many numbers are floating through my head right now.
Well, well, I mean, yes, in the sense that the reference price always was about BEAD outlay, right? Now, in the pre June 6th, that's what it was, right? The reference price, as we talked about a lot, is just like a neutral, objective reference point for a given PAU. And remember that the reason that that is a scoring tool is so that there can be apples to apples comparisons between applications that overlap with each other partially but not fully, right? So that's the basic mechanism. But at the end of the day, it is that BEAD outlay for the total application, whatever PAUs it includes, compared to the sum of the reference prices, that will initially just determine that BEAD outlay score. So again, I guess to say that in a less complicated way, the reference prices always were about BEAD outlay, and that's what we're doing. It's still BEAD outlay is still what we're doing, and the only difference is now it is the only primary criteria, not one of the primary criteria.
Thanks, John.
Is Texas removing eligible BSLs that are served by unlicensed fixed wireless? If so, on what basis?
So we are currently in the process of receiving and evaluating evidence from unlicensed fixed wireless providers that submitted a notice of intent to provide such evidence. So we will review all of their evidence, all of the information that they provide us, and if their evidence proves that those locations are reliably covered with 100 over 20 megabits per second, then we will remove them from BEAD eligibility. That's where we're at right now. We haven't confirmed or denied any locations at this point. We're still reviewing all of the information, but we will update the list if we do decide to remove any locations. And the full reasoning behind the unlicensed fixed wireless challenge process is outlined in the BEAD policy notice as well.
Another question, is Texas going to request a waiver to meet the state statutes of fiber preference?
No.
Next question. How are you interpreting the scalability requirement in regards to LEO and wireless and being able to meet the consumer demands for the years to come?
So scalability is going to be evaluated on a level playing field. There are certain criteria that I believe are outlined in our NOFA of you must meet this speed by this amount of years. And this will get you 5 points versus 3 points versus 2 points. But every technology is going to be considered on the same requirements and the same scaling system.
Yeah. And again, they have to be evaluated on a local level based on a given project. So from a technical engineering standpoint, the question of scalability, just to use LEO, because that's what the question asked about, in an area where there's not that many locations, easy line of sight to the sky, no trees, hills, etc. That's one scalability analysis. In a different area, maybe a lot more locations, a lot more line of sight issues, etc. That's a different scalability determination. That's what the guidance requires, and that's what all states are going to have to do it that way, including Texas.
Awesome, thanks, guys. Another question about the maps. When will the maps be available, and will there be a charge?
So the maps are available right this very second. Our PAU map is available for you to go and look and see reference prices and everything. Our location map is only going to require a small update of 3,000 locations, probably no more. And even then, those locations are being fully removed from the map. So our per location map is available for you to look at as well. There's no charge for any of our maps. There's no charge to use any of the location lists that we have provided on our registration page. Everything is completely free for applicants to use and rely on as they prepare their applications.
Thank you. Next question is about the policy notice. The policy notice states that the period of performance for LEO is extended to 10 years from the date of awardee certifying full availability of service. Is that also required for other technologies?
No, they have a different period of performance. John, if you know the number off the top of your head, again, the numbers are swirling together.
Right. No, for other technologies, I mean, remember there's two concepts. There's the period of performance to deploy the service to the locations, but then there's a longer federal interest period in the assets, right? So for non-LEO, I mean, it hasn't changed. It's been the same for the last 3 years. It's a 4-year period of performance to build the project, and then the federal interest in the assets lasts for 10 years after the end, right? So if you take 4 years to build your fixed wireless network, the total federal interest period runs for a total of 14 years, or whenever it was built, for 10 years after the closeout of the grant. So that hasn't changed at all.
All right, thank you guys. Do you know when you might release the revised list of eligible locations that remove any unlicensed fixed wireless locations?
Our team, who is more technically savvy than I am, said quickly after the 4th of July break, at the latest.
Next question on the unlicensed fixed wireless question. What if they do serve the minimums, but the offered cost is high? Would those BSLs be removed from the eligible BSL map?
Yes, they would still be removed because they do meet the criteria to be a served location.
Will Texas disperse funding to LEOs based on successful take rate? This is an option in the policy notice.
That will be outlined in our notice of funding availability and our sample grant agreement for those interested to review. We're still dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and sometimes things change last minute. So just the NOFA will be the best place to look.
Current LEO providers may not meet the bandwidth requirements today. However, their technology roadmap over the next 4 years may achieve compliance with new satellites and delivery platforms. Can a LEO provider bid based on a future roadmap, or must the technology be deployed today?
That's interesting. So if they meet the criteria to meet a priority broadband project, they can apply as a priority broadband project. If their technology does not meet the criteria for a priority broadband project, they can still apply, but it will be labeled as a non-priority broadband project that is intending to scale up over a period of time. So that's kind of the situation we're in. John, also, if you want to provide additional feedback.
Again, what I've said a bunch of times now, I mean, the NFAT requirement, the statutory requirement is that all that be evaluated at the given local project level. So that's what we'll do. And just remember, there are two distinct concepts. Concept number one is, does a given proposed project of whatever technology type meet the statutory minimum performance level, which is 100 by 20 and the 100 millisecond latency. Okay, so that is, you have to do that to be eligible for BEAD, period. Whether or not you are a priority project, right? So that is unrelated to the priority determination. The first question is, can a given service do 100 by 20? And in a given area, will the provider do it within the 4-year build out period? I think it's fair to say that all the technologies we've been talking about on this webinar for the last hour and the past webinars, in a given area, probably can meet that standard. That seems to be what the data says. The second question of, is a given proposed project a priority project that under the statutory definition and the NTIA guidance is entitled to preference, meaning it could be selected even if it is not the lowest cost. That has to have evidence of not just meeting that minimum 100 by 20, but as Aaron said, quoting the statute, evidence that it, for the local level, it can scale over time to meet the needs of homes and businesses and support 5G services and other advanced services. If a given project for whatever technology type asks to be treated as a priority project, it must provide technical evidence that it meets that standard for the local project that is at issue, has to have a PE stamp on it so that we know it's backed up by an engineer. And then it will be evaluated by BDO. Those determinations will be made, and then the selection rules will be applied based on those determinations. And then that's really all we can say. I mean, really, the emphasis from NTIA is you cannot make these determinations anymore at the broad brush. This technology always is X, this one always is Y. That's the heart of the NTIA guidance. You cannot do that. It's got to be based on specific evidence review of a given project, and that's what we're going to do.
Awesome, thank you. During the discussion of the BEAD program update slide, you mentioned that the BDO had sent an extension waiver request but had not heard back yet. What would be impacted if the extension request was granted?
It really depends on which date. If NTIA allows us an extension, they would set the extension to. We as a state have a requirement to do a 30-day state application challenge period. So that's going to be the first priority to make sure we can get that done. And if we're granted additional time, then we'll find other areas that we need the time to be spent on. So we'll keep you all posted as we communicate and work with NTIA and hear feedback from them on what that extension could look like with the updated schedule of events.
Yeah. But Aaron, it's fair to say that we're very unlikely going to change that July 9th start date, irrespective of the waiver. I mean, I guess never say never, but
never say never, but it would take a pretty extensive extension waiver from NTIA for us to extend that July 9th date.
Yeah. And NTIA is clearly telling states that they are quite serious about the timeline. I mean, they're entertaining waiver requests, but NTIA's message to states is not 90 days is nice to have. Their message is we're serious about it, and then they're looking at waiver requests in a reasonable way. But I think we are not planning on an extended longer period of time.
Yeah, I did, just to maybe make a little bit of a joke, I did see a future question coming up asking how we're going to be able to sleep. The answer is if we get an extension, maybe we could work in a few naps sometime in the deconfliction process. We'll see what comes available to us.
Yeah. Next question. Will growth projections be accepted to evaluate scalability in low backhaul areas?
Scalability, do they mean scalability?
I'm guessing scalability, but
okay.
Yeah.
I'll
actually throw this to John again. I apologize.
I mean, certainly backhaul is certainly a highly relevant technical consideration for scalability. I mean, actually, that's a great example of this local factor, right? I mean, again, this is what NTI has emphasized. You can't just say, well, this last mile technology can scale easily because of its inherent technical characteristics. It's about the local project, right? So you have to also show, to use that example, yeah, we have backhaul that also can scale. And especially if we don't own that backhaul, if we're buying backhaul from another provider, like here's the evidence that they can also scale it up. I mean, it's all part of that local determination, and it is about demonstrating that you can scale to higher performance levels over time based on the total project design and all the technical characteristics. It's not, I mean, I just really we really want to emphasize that. This is not about just showing, well, we have a technical demonstration that this given last mile connection to the location can be scaled over time with certain assumptions. It's about saying the actual project in this area, we sort of demonstrated in a rigorous way with a PE stamp that it really can scale up far beyond the 100 by 20 that is the minimum for kind of current performance.
Great. And kind of staying on that question. So what happens if a BEAD recipient does not meet the scalability requirement within 3 or 5 years?
So our scalability requirement is more about the technical capabilities of the proposed technology. We, as the BDO, will not be monitoring to make sure that you do in fact scale up past the grant, the agreed upon required speeds. So.
Another scalability question regarding 5G scalability. Are you considering the cost of frequency acquisition, or is the percentage G readiness I'm guessing that's 5G, primarily aimed at enabling access for incumbent wireless operators such as national providers like Verizon and T-Mobile.
John, I'll let you take this one.
I mean, I'm going to say the same thing that I've said to the last several versions of this. I mean, it's about, for that project locally, what does a given provider have for its actual total engineering solution? And again, I mean, I think Count Aaron and I sympathetic to the theme of all these questions. You know, we understand you just want to know how this is, you just want to know how are things going to be treated. But the NTI guidance, I mean, it is pretty clear on its handful of things it's requiring states to do. And the thing it is clearest on is you cannot make generic characterizations of different technologies with respect to this priority definition. You just can't. So we can't give the answer. I'm sympathetic. I know that all the questions are intended to get us to say, well, yeah, this is how we're going to kind of do it relative to the different kinds of technologies. We cannot answer that question in any way other than how we've been answering it, which is really just going to be based on the evidence submitted for a given project. That's all that we're allowed to do.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Another question, just to clarify, the email you sent for this webinar shows a link of business planning tools, including maps. And there is a chart, and there is a charge for any of the information. You mentioned that there would not be a charge. Will we be receiving a link to the free maps?
I'm curious to see what the email you received looks like, because our email, we do not charge for any of the resources that we provide to our stakeholders, to interested applicants. I did just respond to your question with the link to the landing page for our registration page. There's going to be 2 buttons on that page, one to view the location information and one to review the PAU map. There's a 3rd button, it's red and it says register. That's going to take you to all of our additional resources, including CSV files with location IDs, shape files of our project area units, anything like that. So I'm very interested to see what that email looks like. If you're able to forward it to us at broadband@cpa.texas.gov, just so we know what information is being shared on our behalf, we would really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Next question, concerning wireless access, will the government provide support for obtaining license frequencies, for example, through mechanisms like CBRS or other comparable spectrum initiatives?
CBRS, both the priority access licenses and the general access licenses are fully eligible for BEAD. They always have been. I'm not sure what the question about government support for. I mean, the BDO is obviously not going to help applicants with spectrum license issues at the FCC, but the CBRS and other actually, as we talked about a lot, fully unlicensed bands are fully eligible for BEAD, as is CBRS, so-called license by rule. Obviously, licensed spectrum is. So it's all just about the fundamental technical capability. Certainly, if you're going to make a priority claim involving a wireless-based technology, you will need to talk about what spectrum bands you're going to use, talk about expected performance of those bands in the local area. If it's an unlicensed band, talk about contention issues. I mean, all that's highly irrelevant to the priority determination, but fundamentally, no. I mean, the BDO is going to expect that anyone that's applying for BEAD funds has their spectrum plan in hand, and that'll be described in the application.
Thanks, John. Will the definition of technical minimum be that the solution must serve all BSLs at the minimum technical specifications at the same time?
Yes. All locations that are included in your project area must be able to receive 100/20 bare minimum at the same exact time with limited interference and limited downtime. John, anything to add?
Well, and then the scalability determination for priority also needs to address that same issue. Again, this is about, going back to first principles, this is about deploying good broadband service to all the locations that need it in the state of Texas. And so that determination of simultaneous usage is definitely relevant for scalability.
Thanks, guys. If the BDO awards a location a BEAD award for LEO technology that takes 4 years to be deployed, will it prevent that location from being eligible for future grant funding in the interim period?
Yes.
Next question. Earlier, it was stated that eligible locations that remove unlicensed fixed wireless locations will be uploaded after July 4th. So does that mean that the eligible location list will not be fully updated until after July 4th?
So we're saying July 4th after July 4th at the very, very, very latest. And that is if we receive 600,000 locations all submitted. That's just going to take us time to go through. We're not anticipating it to take until after July 4th. So July 9th is going to be the absolute latest that we would release those locations because that's when applications are starting. But we will do our very best to get those released before we go out for the 4th of July. And it's very much looking like we will be able to get all of that done, reviewed, and determined before the 4th of July.
Yeah. It's worth maybe just being clear on this unlicensed coverage issue that is obviously part of the guidance. Remember that it's a very specific review, right? The question is, so the NTI guidance changes the approach that the prior approach, which was to categorically exclude unlicensed fixed wireless coverage, right? So the new NTI guidance says, no, that's not permissible. But the starting point is not anyone that claims unlicensed coverage anywhere. It's not about a new challenge process. The starting point is if there are locations that in the baseline FCC map, the broadband data collection map, if those have been reported as served above the 100 by 20 standard by an unlicensed provider, right? So it's the reason code 70, I think, in the FCC map. That's the starting point. You have to have said prior to the FCC, yes, we actually serve that location above 100 by 20. That's the starting point, and then the unlicensed providers who have done that have this 7-day notice period to provide evidence to the state of the actual performance level, and that's what's being reviewed, right? So from a practical standpoint, even if it's not until after July 4th that the BDO does the kind of official process version of that, your starting point would be go to the FCC map and take a look at unlicensed wireless technology type reason code 70 showing coverage. That would be the maximum, and then the question will just be relative to that, which providers actually responded to the notice, provided the additional information. This is not about a broad new claim of coverage by unlicensed providers. The starting point has to be what's been provided in the most recent BDC cycle to the FCC.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Has Texas submitted the revised IP, and have you received approval of the proposal?
We have not submitted yet. We are still working on some loose ends. John, sorry, you had something you wanted to say?
Well, no, and it's worth actually clarifying, right? Actually, no state, neither Texas nor any state, submits a revised initial proposal as a result of this process. What you submit is, if you look at, I think it's the last page of the NTI notice. It's the now famous Appendix D. The state just completes that letter, which basically says to NTIA, we, the state of X, agree basically to modify our initial proposal implicitly to comply with the new notice. But there's no step where you then actually revise the prior initial proposal. In other words, what Aaron just has walked through about how the benefit of the bargain realm will work in Texas, that's what it is. There's no kind of retroactive updating of the initial proposal. NTI is very serious about the timeline, and so they just didn't want to build a bunch of time and to require states to go write a bunch of words. They just wanted the state to say, look, this is what we're doing, and let's get it done.
Thanks, guys. Kind of a request here. Can we get a file of all reference prices by PAUs, please? Using the map is very time consuming.
I thought we had one. Sorry, Stephanie. Let me double check. I believe we have something that's available for download on our registration page. Let me look into that, and if we can get that up before then, we absolutely will.
Awesome. Moving ahead while you check that out, a follow-up about simultaneous service. Does that apply to all technologies?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
John,
and
unless you want to.
again, no. I mean, yes, but I mean, again, just it's important to be precise about this, right? So when reviewing evidence of scalability in a priority treatment request, a relevant factor will be demonstrated ability of that project in that area to scale to meet the needs of all the users at the same time. Now, you can choose to meet that however you want. You may say, we can meet almost all of them, not all of them, and that's all part of the holistic review of the scalability claim. But yes, it applies to all technologies. That's the theme, right? NTI said you cannot make categorical determinations about technologies. It must be based on actual evidence in the actual area, and that applies to everything, including that question.
Yeah, and that question had a follow-up that tied to the policy notice on page 17. It says that for unlicensed fixed wireless, that for sufficient capacity, the network must be able to provide at least 5 megabytes per second of simultaneous capacity to each BSL in that project area. Is that just for existing coverage, or does that apply to BEAD applications as well?
Well, so I believe in the notice, technically that's only, so I believe that vis-a-vis the notice, that is specific to the current coverage claim. But I think that is a helpful reference point. I mean, in other words, from the state standpoint, whatever else you do, you want to make sure that what you do will meet with what NTI is looking for when they review final proposals. So I think most states would say, look, I mean, that's a useful reference point that NTI has helpfully provided that is at least is a good starting point for this question of how well can a shared capacity network, right? So, satellite and fixed wireless, fundamentally, they're shared capacity networks. The question of how well those scale over time, simultaneous use, I think that 5 megabits per second is probably a useful reference point, but it's certainly not something that's mandatory for the priority definition. I mean, NTI did not say anything other than states must apply the statutory definition at the local project level. There are no other quantitative technical definitions that NTI has provided. They left it up to the states to apply it in the way that we've been talking about. But 5 megabits is useful because NTI said that seems reasonable to them for at least current performance. So I would imagine, it's a reference thing. It's a useful thing to look at as a reference.
Awesome. Technical question here. Will route files, such as shape files, be required with application submission? If so, will the BDO publish a required coordinate system and schema?
No, shapefiles aren't required as part of the application period. They're definitely encouraged, just so that we can get a better visualization of what your project's going to be. But if you need to take a screenshot or provide a PDF, that's also fine. When mapping out your project area, you do not need to do a full shapefile and have that coordination with us.
Thanks, Aaron. Would it be possible to send an email out to your list of interested parties when you release the revised list of eligible locations?
I'm not able to commit to that at this time just because I do not know what the level of work we will be having going around in the office and what we'll be able to communicate at that point in time. I would just recommend to keep looking back at our registration page for the updated list of locations that will be removed from the eligible list. We're not posting a full new list of 300 locations that are now eligible, 300,000 locations that are eligible for BEAD. We're simply listing the BSLs that will be removed from eligibility. And if you're starting to look at the difference between version 5 and version 6, only about 3,000 locations have been removed through the true-up process. So you can go and compare between the two versions on your own, just kind of what those locations are going to look like.
Thanks, Aaron. Will leveraging existing fiber, tower, or transport assets be treated neutrally, or preference be given to all new infrastructure in the technical scoring?
So we won't be giving preference to new technology. We really want you to think about what infrastructure you have and what you can build off of to try and keep costs down while still having a technically feasible project. So that's the same for all of our locations, all of our our technologies, anyone who wants to apply. Really just critically think about what you have and what you need in order to connect to those locations.
Thanks, Aaron. Are you going to take June 30th FCC data submission?
So we're using version 6 of the fabric that has been available to us. We currently do not have availability to any of the data that was submitted. So we're doing the best that we can, but no data will be incorporated into the BEAD program. Just the
Awesome.
fabric.
Will BDO allow submission of multiple PAUs applications with self-contained modules that can be considered for partial award?
So within your application, oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's what the severability matrix is, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, within every single application and project areas, you'll be able to submit a severability matrix, which will outline your sub-projects. So which PAUs you can do combinations of, what the cost of those combination of project area units would be. And throughout the deconfliction process, we'll go back and evaluate your sub-projects, your main project to kind of see what's the best option for the state of Texas in that area.
Next question, will applications using FCC derived data for BSL's modeling be accepted, provided they reconcile to fabric data prior to the award execution?
So when you're submitting an application, we want you to be using the data that we provide using the application portal. There shouldn't be a difference between the FCC data and what we're providing you in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. I mean, just to be much more true north is what the state of Texas says is eligible. I mean, whenever that final reconciliation, the unlicensed fixed wireless is done, prior to July 9, in the portal, every PAU will have a set of eligible locations. That's it. That is what we're doing. It doesn't matter if it doesn't square up with FCC or something somebody else thinks. What's in the portal is what the program's based on.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I know that was kind of a marathon there, but we are approaching time, so I'll hand it back to you, Aaron, to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So thank you everybody so much for attending. I think this has been a record-breaking roundtable for the BDO here with the most number of participants and dare I say the longest time we have spent discussing a program. So thank you all so much for attending. If you continue to have questions, please feel free to email us. If they're quick questions, I can stay on for 5 more minutes and wrap it all up, but quick questions, no technical questions, no nothing like that. Any technical questions, please submit to the official NOFA Q&A process, which will become available once the NOFA is released tomorrow. When you submit your questions, please make sure that you reference the Texas BEAD program. We currently have 2 NOFAs in action right now, so we want to make sure that we get all of your questions organized and filed away. So thank you all again. Have a great rest of your day, and good luck with the BEAD application process.